Elliot. Welcome to the Accidental Ghost podcast. How are you and where are you this wild and windy Monday morning?
Morning, Manda. Yes, I'm very well, thank you. I'm currently sitting in my book nook in my bedroom in St. Leonard's. I've been 27 for about 2 hours now, so I'm looking forward to a really nice day. And yeah, feeling remarkably, surprisingly optimistic about everything at the moment, which is a lovely place to be.
Which is lovely. We are recording
Amazing.
this the week before the American election. It will go out the day after when I assume there will be chaos. But we hope the chaos will head in the right direction. And happy birthday. I'm sure you did tell me that it was your
Thank
birthday
you.
when we were recording and I didn't take note of that. So welcome to 27. That's a
Thank you.
long way in my rearview mirror. But it was fun. So I hope you have a wonderful 27th year. So in your 27th year, after quite an interesting path to get here, which we will definitely talk about, you are bringing permaculture to school children. And education seems to me an area that we really, really need to dive deeply into. I think it was Zach Stein that said, young people are the R&D department of humanity. Definitely, they are the future by definition. And how we help them to grow into being full, healthy, engaged and enlivening people has to be core to getting through the meta crisis. So open up for us with your view of what permaculture is and how you can bring it into schools. Over to you. Take that wherever you want it.
Thank you. So in terms of permaculture, there's a million different ways that it can manifest because it's fundamentally a system of design. But just as a brief overview for anybody who's never heard the term before, it's a system of designing spaces or designing systems that focuses on looking after people and the planet at the same time, and really has a focus on spirals of abundance. You set up systems that become increasingly resilient and produce increasingly kind of beneficial outputs to the ecosystem and to the people that work with them over time. So it's traditionally used with working with land. If you've heard of things like kind of, I don't know, people digging swales or building food forests, which we'll cover later, those are usually associated with permaculture. And then, so I suppose that's the simple answer. And then you'll get to hear a little bit more about what we're doing and what that looks like through talking about the schools. So the
Just before we do
permaculture,
that, let me ask a
please,
question of increasingly beneficial outcomes. We are recording a week ahead of the American election. Madison Square Gardens happened last night. There are different views of what a beneficial outcome would be. How are you, Elliot, defining a beneficial outcome? What are the baselines of what you're looking for the system that you're working in, which is an education system and a land system?
So for me, fundamentally, it's about the provision of basic needs, whether those are for people, whether that's within an ecosystem. I think a lot of the difficulty that we experience socially is because of how much of our economy is focused on things which aren't tangible, which don't meet our basic needs, but tied into this system of kind of exponential growth. And exponential growth takes us further and further away from basic needs. So the increasing output, the increasing benefit that you get from permaculture is to do with providing more and more food, more and more well-being, whilst also developing the strength and resilience of the ecosystem within which that is taking place.
Right. Brilliant. Okay. You were going to head on in another direction. So thank you. So we've got providing basic needs in terms of food and resilience of the ecosystem. And I would assume also things like water retention, that's part of the resilience, isn't it? That we're growing soil, we're storing water, we're increasing biodiversity, all of the things that we look for in regenerative farming, you're also looking for in permaculture because they grew hand in hand. And now you're bringing it into schools. So tell us, take us deeper into that.
So within our school, we are lucky enough to have three different flavors of area that we're working with, which fits really nicely into this zoning mentality that we have in permaculture. So our zone one, our absolute hub where we do almost everything, is our little allotment space, which is a space that I inherited from some dear friends of mine who've also done some work there. A beautiful bit of synchronicity, but I'll come back to that. So we have this allotment space, which has been transformed from some old cricket nets. We have a couple of beds, which we do our growing in, and then the steel frame structure of those cricket nets has been turned into a water collection system. We've got our shed there. We've got a polytunnel that's waiting to be built. So that's also where we have our circle where we come together and meet.
Okay, I have a question on that. I am struggling to imagine how you turn a cricket net, I actually don't know what a cricket net is, into a bed. Because bed, tell me more about that.
So the cricket nets have become the water collection system. The beds just look like any other beds.
Okay.
But if you can imagine, a cricket net is made up of two tall steel scaffolding poles that are formed cubes. And whilst people are batting, they practice batting inside these kind of large netted frames.
Oh, okay. Right, so the balls don't hit the windows.
So the balls don't hit the windows or the other cricketers who are batting right next to them.
Right. Okay.
And
cool.
What we've done is we've suspended canvas from the top of these steel cubes. We've weighted them down with bricks, and they are then attached into our water butts. So they catch rain as it falls from the sky.
Right. And what size is a cricket net cube thing?
So I suppose there's 6 cubes in total. Each one's maybe in fact is exactly 3 by 3 by 3 meters.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. So it's really effective at capturing rain. The only issue is that the current capacity of our butts is quite low. They fill up in about 3 days of heavy rain. So we're looking to upgrade to IBC tanks.
Right. They're good fun. Okay,
yes.
Thank you. Yes, and for people outside the country, IBC tanks take a ton, basically. I don't remember the exact size, but they take a ton of water, 1,000 litres of water a ton. And you can get them extremely cheaply because the ones we have were transporting peanut oil, organic peanut oil or something. You want the ones that were not transporting something totally toxic. They're probably still leaking PFAs into the water and definitely microplastics, but they'll store your water for you. Okay, I'll stop interrupting. So let's take a step back because you're describing the system as it exists. Why is your school helping the kids to understand about growing? Because I'm not sure that's universal at schools in the UK and certainly not schools around the world. What was it that led this school into deciding that it would be useful for the young people to engage in something like growing their own food?
Well, just before I answer that, there's 2 more bits of the system that are really important to the answer.
Okay.
So I'd like to really briefly outline those.
Yeah.
So just above the allotment, we then have a sunny bank, which is turning into our food forest, which, as opposed to your annual high work vegetable patches, will be a perennial food system that's like a woodland, looks after itself, but provides increasing amount of food for the next 80 years. And give it 5-10 years of work, it will require very little input. It'll just thrive and provide food and habitat. And then, so that would be our zone 2.
And that's sunny bank is south facing by definition.
It's a south facing sunny bank with a large school building just behind it to the north. So it gets a lot of warmth. It's quite well protected. It's pretty ideal.
What kind of size are we talking?
Probably the area that we're currently cultivating as a food forest is probably about 100 meters long, and perhaps 30 meters across.
Okay.
So,
and how many trees will you get on that roughly, do you think?
So we've got another 5 fruit trees on their way in. So we'll probably have about around 13 trees in total for the upper canopy level. But that doesn't include things like hazels, tall shrubs, which will be interplanted amongst those.
Brilliant.
But the exciting thing is this is just one pocket of the school that we're working on. And why I'm so excited by food forests is it does not take a lot of space to increase the number of trees you can plant. They're really low maintenance. So once you've established one pocket, you move on to the next and you keep doing that and you keep doing it.
All right. Trojan horses of food forest. Excellent. Okay. And there was another field before we looked into why. So that's your zone 2.
That's our zone 2. And then our zone 3 is the small patch of woodland which you can get to sort of around the allotment in the food forest. And I'm calling this a zone 3 rather than a zone 5 because we do coppice it. We are going to be bringing in things like wild garlic and more woodland species. So whilst it is a woodland and the kids get to experience it as their sense of the wilderness, we will also be relating with it and cultivating it a little bit, as opposed to pure zone 5, which is untouched wilderness and for observation only.
Right. Beautiful.
Within permaculture linguistics.
For people who aren't familiar, so zone 3 is more interactive, zone 5 is untouched wilderness. What is zone 4?
So perhaps more foraged woodland, I think, or planted woodland that might not be a food forest, but is still kind of very much for human relation. And you might well still have, things like log piles there, or you might have done some swale building. You've still interacted with it, but it's in the broad scope of zones, zone 0 is the area that has the most interaction. Zone 0 being the self, and zone 5 has the least interaction, being the wilderness.
Brilliant. And for people outside the UK, or actually people not familiar with the geography immediately around you, can you describe a little bit about the landscape in which your school is set?
Sure. So both ecologically and socially, it's a really interesting one. We're on the south coast of England, in quite a lucky spot, actually. We have a reasonable number of vineyards outside, assuming that everything remains the same, and we are working on that assumption, which it will. Because it must. We have a really nice kind of quite mild microclimate. The sea keeps us reasonably warm. It never gets super cold. And then from a social point of view, fingers crossed, we are planting Siberian peas.
Okay, I have spent some of the weekend watching YouTubes on the likelihood of the amok collapsing. But anyway, as that goes, all other bets are off. So let's not worry about that. You're planting Siberian peas. Well done. Good.
Sure. It's not nothing. It's not nothing. But socially, the landscape's really interesting as well because you've got a real mix of different types of, within a town, within our town, we've got, sort of quite kind of dense urban centres, with everything you'd expect from your kind of, from your high street. You've got your chicken shops and your co-op and your boutique clothes stores and your zero waste refillable shop. But then we quickly head into suburban spread, and then we quickly again head into some really quite wild areas of nature. We've got the South Saxon woodlands. I spent yesterday in St. Helens Wood. There's a lot of quite deep, old green space in the immediate vicinity. So for kids who do want to get out into nature, whilst many kids aren't given that immediately, it's actually on a lot of our doorsteps.
Right. And are you leading them out there? Is that part of what you do?
Not yet. Not yet. But I do encourage them to spend more time it's my job to get them to spend more time in nature and hopefully to cultivate those relationships and that understanding and excitement that they may not otherwise have access to.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So let's loop back to why this school? Why are you being given the chance to evolve different zones of permaculture when that's not universal within at least UK education and I would say global education yet?
So there's a number of reasons. Part of it is because the allotment site, not the food forest, but the allotment site has been cultivated on and off for quite a while. There's been a history of having people working on that, including a dear friend of mine, Luke, who runs Project Rewild, which is how I first got to know the space. But I think the particular interest for the school is that The school is enormous. It's a really, really, really large school, and we are in.
Give us a sense of what that is, because around the world, enormous has different meaning. How many students roughly?
That's fair. I think it's about 1,500.
Right. Okay. So by UK standards, it's huge. By, I would suspect, standards some places
Many
around
other
the world, that's
standards
probably
not.
quite medium. Okay, but 1,500 is a
Sure.
fair number of students. And what age range does it go from and to?
It's 11 to 16.
Okay.
And so what with the size of the school and the catchment area, we do have a lot of students who struggle one way or another. So there's a really strong focus on alternative provisions for the students, because whilst most of the school runs on a carrot and stick kind of behavior model, there's certain students for whom that just simply doesn't work, which is understandable because it's made to curate behavior, and that works for students whose behavior is easily curated.
So we have a school on the south coast of England that is doing something that probably isn't wholly unique in the UK, but it's different enough for me to be curious as to how this school decided this would be a good idea. How did they decide that this would be a good idea?
Well, I think fundamentally they're kids who struggle being indoors all day, whether they're bouncing off the walls or whether they're dreaming and disassociating and kind of just staring out those. There's a lot of students who really struggle to either be in a classroom setting and learning effectively, or even getting into school at all. And I ended up in this remarkable position where I was offered the opportunity. A company reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you like to be a tutor? It's a freelance job. You can do as little as you like." And I said, "Well, my current job's finishing, so this will be perfect to get us between. Would you like to work at St. Leonard's Academy? Well, it's just down the road from me." And I was thinking, what? I've actually done a bit of work with Project Rewild on this allotment site to begin with. Maybe I could a couple of weeks and then give them a nudge and say, hey guys, can I bring this on to a full permaculture site? And I think on day 2, the woman who ran the provision said to me, hey, you do some outdoors stuff, don't you? Do you reckon you might be able to take our lot out there and get them rolling with it? And I thought, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure. Wow, what a nice idea. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that at all. And
Right.
within a couple of weeks, I was out, starting to explore, and that's now turned into a full-time get to lead 5 days a week.
Brilliant.
So it's just evolved and evolved and evolved.
Excellent. So things fall into place. And you'd already done permaculture training, obviously, or they wouldn't have asked you this. Yes?
So I was in doing my EDC, which is my permaculture design course. But for the last 4 years, I've been working with different forms of education, much of which has been related to permaculture. So I learned a lot of this in the Dominican Republic that I went to work with. And remarkably, specifically because I wasn't able to shut with them when I was expecting to, they brought in a permaculture teacher to fill my space. So by the time I arrived, their permaculture was deeply embedded within the curriculum, and I got to experiment with it there. But this is also part of the reason that I think that permaculture in schools and businesses is so exciting. For a lot of people who practice permaculture, there's such a strong emphasis on being a level culture practitioner who knows every plant combination and how to do it.
Sounds scary.
But if you've seen it done, there's a lot of emphasis on perfection and planning and getting it absolutely right, which if you don't have the land, the money, the resources to practice permaculture in your own, means that nobody gets to be a regenerative practitioner. Whereas if you business with school and say, I'm not going to do this perfectly, but I can make a space that make your student or your employees feel healthy, feel safer, feel better. You get to tick your greens. You get to have organic food that's produced on site. You can have all of these things. I get to come in as a practitioner, provided you can pay my time. And then you bring in waste from the community. We're fueled by coffee grounds from our local coffee shops. We're fueled by blocks of mushroom mulch from our local mushroom grower. We have money coming in from different members of the community paying for trees. So rather than having one person anywhere who knows how to do it. It's about bringing the resources together and creating something dynamic that improves well-being, provides food, takes waste out of kind of the way towards landfill, and actually turns it back into carbon-rich soil. And you get rewarded with raspberries. And raspberries
Fantastic.
require less work than broccoli. You have to plant a broccoli every year.
Yeah. At some point, I'm going to find out how to prune my raspberries, because I've never quite worked that one out. There's different between the spring and the autumn, but we won't go into that here and now. A little while ago, you said trauma-informed education. And last week we had Andrew Hale, whose focus is on trauma-informed care in dogs. And it seems to me that general educational science in humans and the more than human world is moving towards trauma-informed care. I realize we're talking about permaculture, but can you tell us a little bit about what that is, how it functions, how you understand it, and a tiny bit about the Dominican Republic, because that sounds really interesting. Over to you. Just go with that wherever you want.
Thank you. So I'd just quickly like to clarify that there's a strong relationship between trauma-informed practice and permaculture. The second value in care, so taking space for humans within permaculture, we're part of the ecosystem. Our resilience comes from negotiating our trauma. But in answer to your question, the system that we use is one called the Mate's House, which is part of a it could be such a rabbit hole. But the basic premise of the Mate's House is that if you can imagine a house with a two-dimensional house, a drawing of a two-dimensional house with a room in the middle, an attic above it, basement below it. And what this model teaches us is that through the day, if we're feeling comfortable in the room, but we upregulate and we downregulate within it. So if you need to run a bus, your nervous system ticks up a little bit, your breathing rate increases, your heart rate increases, you get that little rush of energy to get to the bus, and then hopefully you sit down to have a meal or even to have a difficult conversation with a loved one. Your nervous system will generally teeter down a little bit, and you can tick up and you can tick throughout the day, completely fine and healthy. The problem comes when we cross over those thresholds into the attic or into the basement. When you tick up and up and up and then cross that threshold into the attic, fight and flight responses, the prefrontal cortex switches off, and we lose the ability to make decisions that are in line with our values. We kind of lose executive function degree, and that look like bouncing off the walls. It can look like swearing. It can look like fighting. It can look like an inability to sit still, or we can tick down and down and down and down and cross the threshold into the basement, which might be disassociation. It might be depression. And generally looks like kind of days of crying, or kind of to hide. It's the fight, the flight. Sorry, no, that's wrong.
And the freeze.
It's the freeze. It's the fawn. Yeah, exactly. So, the way that this integrates into our work is that we work with a really broad range of, but very often ones who are either often in the attic or often in the basement, and offer them through the process, gardening work and this nature connection work, activities that allow them to release some of that energy and to come back. So if you've got a kid just bouncing off the walls and can't sit still, rather than trying to sit down and have a long conversation about companion planting, you let them go in the woods for the first 15 minutes. Because that energy has to go somewhere. So if he's in a classroom,
right,
it's going to bounce around the walls. If you punish them, they're just going to press it and it'll explode bigger, further. Or if you let them run for 20 minutes and then dig a hole, they're better. And that energy is released, it's gone, and then they learn how to channel it usefully. Equally, if we have a student who's disassociated, who's feeling very low, you introduce a honeysuckle, you show what honeysuckle looks like, and then get them paint a sign that says whatever their name is honeysuckle, or, we'll name the plants. What our honeysuckle is called Hector, for example, Hector the honeysuckle. So you get them to paint signs There's loads of specific activities that we do where we learn how to do, specific narrative tasks. But sometimes it could be as simple as having a group of 10, or not 10, but, 5 boys who are just buzzing. You say, right, guys, the strawberries need mulching. Go and pick as much grass as you can in the next 10 minutes. And we're going to use that to make a mulch. So they're just there like tearing grass out of the ground.
Right.
But that energy then and it brings them back to a place of calm. And them have reported, without even probed or told, hey guys, this is how we get more funding. They've come back and said, wow, sir, or Elliot, either's, yeah, sir, sir, I feel so much calm. I feel so much better. I can actually go back and pay attention. And whilst it's a slightly different flavor, there's this amazing thread that suggests that for students with ADHD, having half an hour outside is equivalent to a dose of Ritalin in the impact it makes on their ability to concentrate.
Wow. Right. And much, much healthier. And are they learning?
Yeah.
Let me think this through. I know with dogs and horses that when they're over threshold, one of my early behavior teachers said the path between excitement and calm has to be well traveled. And the horse or the dog or whatever needs to understand within itself how to bring itself down for safety around people as much as anything else. When you're dealing with something that could weigh 500 kilos and is going to crunch you to small pieces if it runs over the top of you. With the kids, have you been doing this long enough to find that they are learning to self-regulate or co-regulate as they're doing this, or are you having to help them to do it on a regular basis? Does that make sense as a question?
It does, and it's a kid by kid, group by group scenario. Some of them, the only thing that I get to be able to do is just hold space for them whilst they run around. But lots of them for whom they may do that in one session, they'll come in and they're feeling twitchy and they'll say, hey, can I go and do this for a little bit? And then they'll do that, come and then join the key activity that we'd, I think for me, having a student ask, may I do this activity that I can feel this, is one of the biggest things that the well-being aspect is having an impact. And we see it, or can I go and paint? Those are the two big ones I get. Can I go and break up the mulch and paint?
Right. Because so one is bringing me down into the main room of the house and one is bringing me up from the basement into the living room, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes?
Exactly. And there's lots of different modalities loads of different channels that we play with. And when the weather's, we often have classroom sessions. And I try to introduce them to the mate's house as early as possible. We do things like breathing and we do things like shaking. And again, you get kids for whom they just think you look like a weirdo and they're not interested. But I do have students who give it a try, or say, oh no, sir, the breathing didn't work. But actually shaking was pretty good. And you kind of then see them having a little shake later on and you're like, okay. You don't want to show you're doing it, but it's going in.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, this feels like a really worthwhile rabbit hole because it seems to me, listening to other educators, particularly Zach Stein, who's an educational philosopher, but other people in the field, that our educational system is not fit for purpose. It probably never was, but it was designed to create fodder for factories. People who would sit in rows or at benches or do whatever for long periods of time repetitively. They could read, write, and do arithmetic, so they could be sent to other parts in colonial worlds, out to the colonies, God help us all. And they would be able to write reports that people could read. They would be able to add up columns of figures, and they would be able to function within the greater system. And there wasn't a single bit of that was actually valuable to the children themselves. And then I recently read a thesis by Von Wilkins, who's talking about the zoochosis of humanity, which is to say that, in his opinion, most people in our culture, the Western educated, industrial, rich, democratic culture, are displaying signs commensurate with captive animals in zoos, the same level of psychosis. And he says, and I quote, "The collective developmental trauma that we experience points to a cage that is constructed through norms and conventions and a faulty definition of sanity that condones us living in a way that is killing our own life support system. by living in a way that is anti-ecological and hurting us, but then naming it sanity. We validate and condone it, and then teach it to our kids. It becomes a secret cage that prevents us from living as functioning members of the Earth community. And obviously the key there was, and then we teach this to our kids. We are domesticating our children into something that is completely psychopathological and is bringing us to the edge of the sixth mass extinction. If you, Elliot, were able to redesign the entire education system along trauma-informed lines, but also along lines that enabled the values of a planet and people to thrive, what would you do?
Big question. Firstly, I just want to of what you said in terms of that sense of sometimes being caged, because the thing I often have to remind myself is that fundamentally I'm teaching adolescent primates how to be in the world, and kind of that context is essentially creating an environment where they can grow. But I think what you're touching on is a lot of the stuff at this school in the Dominican Republic with an organization called the Human Hive. And what they shared was a model of so this mate's house model was central to their teaching. So worked along the lines of project-based education, learner-led education. So what we did when we were there is every 6 weeks, so the curriculum was non-linear to begin with. It, rather than having a set of steps that you had to climb to get from A to B to D to F to all of the place that you had to get to kind of aspire and be a successful linear human, everything was broken down into 6-week sessions. And within each of those 6 weeks, we would explore one of the sustainable development goals. So on the first session where I ended up leading a cohort, we were exploring energy and efficiency. So we had a first week, which was actually nothing really to do with the curriculum, and was just us kind of settling into the space, getting to know each other, setting up rhythms for the day, becoming familiar with the dynamics. Something, the lady who ran it, Kate McAllister, used to very affectionately refer to it as, when a pack of dogs come together and they all could go around like sniffing each other's butts. It's that kind of period when everyone kind of gets in. It's like, oh, who are you? How does this work? Like, where are we?
And how do you facilitate that with a bunch of kids? Because there's lots of different ways children get to know each other, and most of them are not socially acceptable. How did you make that happen in a way that was generative and safe?
So each day they were a big fan of their 6-part cycles. Each day was would start off with a series of so we'd have our circle time where everybody would introduce themselves, we'd have a little bit of a chat, and then students would identify whether they were in the attic, living room or basement, identify whether they wanted a task that would upregulate them, keep them neutrally regulated, or downregulate them, and go off with a different practitioner for a walk or to play football. So you're still kind of giving them a thing to focus on, but they're making the decisions for themselves. They're learning to ask for themselves. And most important, they have the choice of how close or far from the action they want to be. Because a student could go along simply to watch the football. You wouldn't coerce them into it. And be there on the edges. And then as they became comfortable, they would come and join. They get closer to the action.
Wow.
They might do it and lead. They might do it and just quietly get along with their stuff to a conversation. They could choose what dynamic suited them best. And every activity had that built-in capacity. So being watched by adults, they're being led by adults, but they have the choice of to what degree and with what energy they interact with it.
Wow.
And that then continued throughout the entire 6 weeks. So after your initial week of getting to know each other, you'd then begin exploring the topic at hand, talking about energy. And rather than having an hour-long lecture on efficiency, we start off all of the energy that we have on the planet to one degree or comes from the sun. Even things like, geothermal energy, which, as I understand it, comes from pressure. It's all caused by gravity, which eventually kind of leads back to the sun. It's quite hippie and woo-woo, but does
No,
serve
a long
to
time ago, we
provide
were all
thanks
hydrogen
for
molecules boiling in
all
the
the
sun.
energy we have. Yeah, exactly. So you'd kind of explore that and then talk a little bit about how, if you can see anything giving off. So say you've got a light bulb. What is the purpose of a light bulb? The purpose of a light bulb is to emit light. Can you see or hear or smell anything coming off that light bulb other than light? Yeah, well, it makes a sound and heat. Okay, cool. So we're walking around marking all the things. And then we start brainstorming. Okay, cool, guys. So what is happening in our school or in the community might be inefficient. Let's focus on energy efficiency. And the kids came up with different issues that they wanted to solve. And we would then build the curriculum around solving that. So brilliant example that that my cohort came up with. First of all, they loved ice cream, but ice cream required freezers, and that was a waste of electricity. But they also noticed tons of excessive energy that wasn't being utilized. So they wanted to create ice that could take the used energy of the children and transmit into ice cream. And then we worked on maps of kind of looking at the different gear sizes. We worked on literacy and communication as we kind of put calls out community to different things. We had a welding workshop as somebody came in to build this bike out of an old BMX. When I've dealt with things like that again, when it came to selling the ice cream and raising funds for more bikes, then have the opportunity to integrate all of these different knowledge in the thing that you want to achieve, as being told, this is the knowledge and you must approach it and validate you. Do you know what I mean? It turns the knowledge into a useful dynamic.
Yeah, it's totally. This is sounding like a dream school. Why is every school not like this?
This is the plan.
Every school in the world should be like this. Say again?
Yeah. I said, that's the plan.
What? I didn't hear what you said. Say it again.
I said, turning every school to doing this kind of thing is the.
Oh, this is the plan. That's right.
I'm being playful. Yeah.
Because it's not going to create little neoliberals, is it? How long has this been running, and what are the students who have graduated from this doing now?
So the Human Hive as an organization has existed since 2016. It was curated by a trauma-informed educator and a trauma counselor. So it's Kate McAllister and Darren Abrahams. And they started their work off with Human Hive as a bus that traveled out to Calais, to the jungle. And they did this model with, so it was initially used to kind of support refugees in developing skill sets that would help them, you know, they would cook, they would sew, they would kind of find people who have different skills that could be shared and useful to make people feel better, but also to generate income. And it's evolved from there. In fact, they're now, there's a beautiful musical collective that Darren has just started, called the One World Orchestra, which, using the same model, brings musicians from all around the world to co-create musical pieces with their own instruments, their own melodies, their own lyrics, bringing in all of these different flavors. And then when they perform, I'm just thinking about this, when they perform and they provide the audience with drums and they teach them song lines at the beginning, so that you then have this just chaotic, beautiful celebration where people can choose how much or how little they want to integrate. But you've got Palestinian Spanish string guitarist and the audience just drumming along, and it's magical work that they do. It's absolutely beautiful. They've just released their first single, actually, called Sin Frontera, with the One World Orchestra. I cannot recommend listening to it enough. Just make sure that you have space to move, because you will dance and you will cry.
You want to dance. So you will send me a link for that, and we will put it in the show notes so that people can go off and buy it and dance to it. This sounds so exciting. Also, I need to talk to Kate and Darren, obviously, at some point on the podcast. That would be very exciting. Seriously, you said this is the plan. And I am wondering, we are now way off St. Leonard's, but we can get back to that. But this feels so much what the world needs now. That if my generation can just stop the damage and hold the space for your generation and for the ideas like this to percolate out. And I don't know much about schools. It's a long time since I was at school, and it was living hell, and it was nothing at all like what you're describing. There was no choice or agency, because the point was to train people not to want choice and agency. Now we know that people need agency to be emotionally, mentally, and spiritually whole. Genuinely speaking, what, from your experience, how is this integrating with general school philosophy and practicality and logistics and politics and everything that defines how schools function around the world? Because I would think it would take off like lightning and it would just spread around the world in a whole, take a year, and then everybody would be doing this, which is clearly not happening. What gets in the way?
Well, so this is the thing. I think from experience is integrated into schools. It does take off. I've had so much fear that the school would respond with, oh, who's this hairy hippie coming in and get our kids all like me and whatever. But actually love it. The students love it. They're doing better in school. They are happier. I've now got students who are repeatedly coming back to me far more than they were initially planned, as they're doing better in school as a result of it. And this is very, very large. And okay, so I suppose the two key thoughts that I have here is that, and a very large part of the reason that I wanted to come onto the podcast was such as being quite a large fan of yours and wanting the opportunity to chat to you. And I also really want to encourage people who to go on and do regenerative work, but don't necessarily have the land to approach schools and to approach businesses with this model. Because once it's in, they love it. And the better perennial food systems is, even if they choose that we're now, it will still doing its thing.
It'll still be there.
The more time you can spend there, the better. But if anybody from the University of Brighton Academy Trust is listening, please do not fire me. But if I did have to leave tomorrow, it'll grow. The food continue to be there.
And the children would still have the tools you give them.
They'd still have tools, and the site would still exist for anybody else who wanted to come at the reins. The other thing that we're trying to do, offset comes in, is my plan is that I would like to remain deeply embedded at the Science Academy for a long, long time. And it's my plan to name this as my site of deep implementation. This is where I want to really kind of show how far this work can go. But I'm also working to be able to establish forests, not the whole, but food forest specifically in other schools, and offer support and training for other staff and develop a program from those. And the thing about a food forest is it actually require a vast amount of work to get it going. This is what I made about permaculture earlier. It's possible to get it perfect and make it, just leaf has kind of justification, but you can make a huge impact that isn't perfect. And that, to a degree, copy and all is really easy to implement. So with this program, so like I was saying earlier, the schools have the land. I've got the ability to do it, but we're lacking money for trees. What I've been doing with Offset, which stands for Our Food Forests Sounds, is I've been approaching local business individuals with cash to spare through Patreon on a monthly basis to allow us to develop the food forest, to upgrade our water system, to buy a big, exciting composter, which I do want to talk to you about. But then once we're at the threshold, we will basically, at the moment, there's about £80 in, which is fantastic. It's brilliant. That's 3 or 4 fruit trees like that. If we can reach 3 a month coming in through these donations, we can start supporting a brand new food. If we get to the stage where I have 100 donors of £20 a month, we will likely be able to support 5 new forests in the community every single year.
Wow. And is there land for those?
The size of the food forest is hard to say. I think we're very lucky with the amount of land we have, but simply having something there and also getting the, because it will be me doing everything with them. I'll be working with the teams in the school, but because of how little work it requires, the buy-in, and also having the model that we have established at St. Leonard's Academy so easy that it's a no-brainer. Hey guys, take these trees, somebody come out and water them with the kids when really, really, really dry.
Right.
You know,
Right.
it's
And
not
teaching how to
difficult.
catch water. Alrighty. So there's lots of questions I would like to follow there, but before we get there, you want to talk about it. Tell me about the big, exciting composter.
So this big, exciting composter is called the Rydan Pro 400. And what it does is it has the capacity to take up to 400 litres of pizza and chips and grated cheese a week and turn it into fungally dominated, hyper-rich, hyper-fertile compost.
Wow.
So if you can imagine the impact of that in a school, which is, churning, producing so much food waste, if you can then turn that back into fertility, it's a game-changing scenario.
Right. But they're not cheap, Rydans. They had one at Schumacher. I know of which I speak.
So they aren't cheap, but again, the money exists out there and there's the people out there who want to see the work being done.
Okay.
So whilst I can't pay for it and the school can't pay for it, the money exists. It's just a case of finding it.
Okay. So you just need a good fundraiser.
We need a good fundraiser. But I think leaning into that, touching it slightly on the synchronicities we were discussing earlier, there's the feeling supported through synchronicity, which has led to the firm understanding that it's not a case of trying to see if we can get a composter. We're getting one of these composters, and I'm looking to see the way that happens.
Okay. Talk to me about that, because I think a lot of people listening, the concept of synchronicity can become very fluffy and very middle class and very, I'm going to think very hard because I want a private jet. Or it can be grounded in actually doing something useful. And yours sounds grounded. So tell me a little bit more about how it's worked in your life and how you identify synchronicities.
I think for me, the role of synchronicity, and I want to clarify here, I do have a very deep-seated spiritual belief, but for me, my relationship with synchronicity is only because I've trained my brain to look for them, and it's purely a product of bias, then I'm really happy. I'm really happy with that because the impact is the same. But for me, the synchronicities that I've experienced in my life have been really wonderful little nudges. Not only they've helped me to identify the right next to take, and as I've experienced more synchronicities and thinking, wow, that one thing was actually the right thing that I needed to experience in that moment. What can I learn from it? Okay, this next thing was the right thing at this moment. What can I learn from it? You start to build up a pattern. Yeah, go on.
Tell me some of the specifics, because before we came on air, you were talking about wanting to be a paratrooper early on, and synchronicities nudged you away from that. Give people specifics, because otherwise it's really hard for people to have a sense of how they might recognize the same thing in their own lives. So just tell us a little bit of history around this.
Sure. So for me, the experience of synchronicities can generally feel just like a little bit of a nudge from the universe, greater or lesser. Sometimes they're monumental, sometimes they're tiny. But the first one that immediately jumps to mind was, through between 14 and about 18, really, I was absolutely determined to become a paratrooper. So, growing fruit trees to jumping out of planes and killing people are quite different pathways. But I was really set on it. It's what I wanted to do. My stepdad did make the very, very, very astute point. He was very, very critical with this and said, Elliot, you do realize that this was your job to jump out of planes and kill brown people. which didn't go into my 60s. I'd had that pointer made to me. That sitting on the beach when I was about 18, I hadn't meditate, I hadn't intended on anything in particular, but I just had really distinct memory of everything slowing down and having these little grains of sand washing across my skin, and then what I can only describe as a thunderbolt moment, and a voice that was partially verbal, partially not, saying, "Do not kill. Life is enough. This is all there is."
Right.
And I remember sitting there on the beach thinking, well, I know what that was. But when you get a thunderbolt, a voice in your head, whether you're religious or not, it seems quite foolish to disregard it. So I remember at that moment thinking, I've noticed this is huge. So I could disregard it, or I could choose to identify it as being really quite significant. And that's what I did. And in that moment, it was decided the right decision to make.
Wow. How far down the line were you in terms of applying?
Oh, not very far at all. I'd spent a long time in the cadets, and have done all of the good. Well, I had an amazing time in the cadets. I don't want to rough that experience, but I was very primed for it, and I loved the idea of the camaraderie. I loved the idea of community. I loved the idea of being outdoors and exploring. But I was still hoping to go to uni and go down the whole Sandhurst application route.
Right.
So I hadn't started making moves on it. But having decided I didn't want to kill and that I didn't know what life would look like, but not particularly good A-level, I ended up going for the new College of the Humanities, which I knew I didn't have grades to get to, but I'd already bought tickets before my A-level results came out. And I thought, well, let's go and see what's going on, see what it's like. And as I was waiting for it to kick off, I was just chatting to this dude at the snacks table and telling him how I wanted history, but I didn't know, I didn't have the grades. I didn't know how I was going to do it. And he turns around and said, well, I'm the head of the hits. Let's have a bit more of a chat. And I don't know if you've come across NCH, but at the time it was very small. It was very lecture sizes were about 10 students. You'd have one-to-one tutorials every week. It was very old school.
Wow.
And I'd been reading a book called The Secret History at the time, which was very, very much based on this. We went to check out the small history room, which was all teacup armchairs and fireplaces. And I asked, by any chance, have you read The Secret History? And he beams and says, I'm Julian, aren't I? Who's their lecturer.
Right.
So it's just these tiny, tiny little things that cumulatively just put that little drop in. And I think as I've paid more and more attention to those things, the scale of them has got bigger and bigger. The impact has become greater and greater and greater. Point where I've had, I first started to dream work, and had this huge dream that I very quickly realized was telling me that I needed to leave London. It wasn't the right place for me, and that I was going to go on a big journey somewhere, with bright blue sky, huge blue sea, pine trees, lots of palm trees, lots of motorbikes. And I recounted this dream to friends because it felt so significant. And then years later, having such a strong, vivid imagery of this dream, having told friends about it, I found myself on that road. I found myself actually there.
In the Dominican Republic, was this?
In the Dominican Republic, yeah.
Wow. So you didn't go to the Dominican Republic because of the dream, but when you got there, you discovered that the dream had prefigured your being there.
Precisely. And what was even more remarkable about it is I worked in this school in a small town called Cabrera, the Human Hive. And at the end of the year was expecting to move to the UK. But the town called Cabarete, which was, maybe 30, 40 away, that had all of these people amazing regenerative work, doing amazing trauma-informed work, and I wanted to explore it more. So it was on the road from Cabrera to K that I found this corner. I was like, whoa, this is uncanny. Like, this place that I've been imagining that I need to go to is along this road to this new town. But the road that I took was broken, like huge areas of roadworks that were really dangerous to ride on a motorbike. And I made the journey to Cabrera and the two towns for months and months and months and months. And I moved to Cabarete. The road had been fixed. It was immaculate. You know,
so you were able to go along the road of your dream.
Yeah, knee impediment.
Goodness. Where did that lead you, Elliot? Because dreams like that don't arrive for no reason other than recognizing that dreams are there, prefigurative dreams happen. This should blow out of the water anybody who thinks dreams are just, twitches of your neurons, because clearly they're not. Your experience is unique to you, but lots of people have prefigurative dreams. What did yours do for the balance of your life? Where did it take you?
Well, I suppose the key themes of the dream itself were, at the time I was living in London, and in the dream we were on top of Hampstead Heath, me, some friends on the top of and this helicopter rose up, an attack helicopter, same level with this wooden pivot, just started shooting bullets and annihilated the whole thing. So I'm terrified and cowering under all this kind of mechanical oppression. The cockpit opens and there were a pair of figures, they're kind of elf-like, Lord of the Rings, Legolas style, long blonde hair, silver jumpsuits though, but one was clearly masculinely feminine. The masculine one sneered and looked over his shoulder, but the feminine one reached out her hand, and as I grabbed it, she threw me miles and miles and miles until I landed on this road. So I got up and knew, okay, well, eventually I'm going to make my way home. And as happens in dream time, I walked down the road and then a long time happened that I wasn't there for. And I came back to the UK, but everything had changed and I didn't fit in anymore and was doing something different.
Right.
And it was through this dream that I ended up moving out from, plans of taking up a nice cushy job in education technology, and started, I really wanted to do lots of work with understanding masculinity, but I had no idea of where to start. And it was through working with feminine archetypes that I actually able to access the masculine. And I do a lot of men's work now with different groups. So I think it did a wonderful job of saying where and how I needed to move, and also the focus leaving the city for thrivality and the essential understanding of the relationship between femininity and masculinity in order to do work in either.
Right. Excellent. Gosh, we should have started the podcast with this, because that would have been a very interesting rabbit hole to go down, but we're actually over time. So at some point we need to talk about that. In the last few minutes, we've got you now, you've been to the Dominican Republic, you come back to St. Leonard's, you're working. We've set up Offset. You're endeavoring to garner money. I will put the link in the show notes. Anyone who wants to give money to Offset, you'd be very welcome, because there's a very big and exciting composter to buy and lots of trees with food forests. And what I heard was you wanted to encourage other people to follow their dream into this kind of work, because there's obviously a need for this in schools around the world to help break kids out of the classroom model and the sit down and learn about quadratic equations, because somehow that's going to be useful in a post-Google world. Is there anything else that you would say to people listening to help them to follow the synchronicities, to follow their dream, to get engaged with what really matters?
I think when it comes to synchronicity, if ever was a time when the forces of the universe were supporting humans to make a change in the name of a better life for us, of a better interconnected way of being, it would be now. So when things show up to give you a little flag to something, you could choose not to. But why on earth would you? Even if it is complete fluffy woo, it works. It really, 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 and we desperately are in need of change, and people know how to do it. So if either of an idea of how to make that change happen show if you follow it. This isn't about knowing how to get things right at the beginning, but rather trusting that the next step will take you in the right direction. So I think one of the things that I valued so much about listening to your podcast is this recognition that we will die. So the question is how and what we leave to our ancestors, to those who follow us. And it allows you to kind of take massive risks, and it allows you to be optimistic because the result will be the same one way.
Yeah.
So it's the case of seeing what the steps are on the way to that result.
Thank you. Were you on our gathering last night dreaming your death awake? Because that was exactly what we were talking about. So thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. That. Yes. And I would also say, I don't think it's fluffy and woo. And I think the mindset that thinks that it is a dying mindset. We need to be hospicing modernity, to use Vanessa's concept. And we need to hospice that mindset that tells us that the imminence of the more than human world is not something we need to pay attention to. Alrighty. Thank you, Elliot. This has been really interesting and has gone in lots of directions I wasn't expecting. So thank you very much indeed. And I look forward to learning more of what you're doing. We'll put a lot of links in the show notes, people, so you can follow up everything that Elliot is doing. Thank you for coming on to Accidental Gods.
Thank you.